How's it going, everybody? Rybread here today, and in this episode, guys, I will be talking about all the new franchise mode features that EA has recently released. And there's quite a few. When they sent out their initial tweet and the initial articles that they published, it was looking kind of grim and slim for franchise mode, but the depth that they went in and added a few new features, it's going to make a huge difference in franchise mode, and the way you play is going to be totally different. So the biggest and most important thing that's going to make franchise mode different this year is coaches. They added coaching, and I just kind of thought, oh, wow, we're going to have one coach behind the bench, and that's going to be the new feature. Well, actually, you're going to be able to control multiple coaches. When I say control, I mean hire and fire. You're the general manager. You hire your head coach, your offensive coach, your defensive coach, and you can do the same thing for the AHL. And also, neat feature, former NHL players can become coaches. So, say Alexander Ovechkin retires, he might elect to become a coach. Same thing with guys like Henrik Zetterberg, those guys that might retire in year one. I don't think Ovi will, but Zetterberg is a guy who could always retire in years 1, 2, or 3 of a franchise mode. And then you can go ahead and hire them as your head coach. Now, coaches have ratings and attributes. Specifically, they have an offensive, defensive, power play, penalty kill, teaching, and coach influence rating. Now, what these each mean is it's how good the coach is at offense, defense, etc. This will affect your players' stats in-game and in the sim engine, which makes a big difference for those of you that, just like to simulate 5, 10 seasons into the future. Having a head coach can really change how your team performs. You might have a bad coach. He might hurt the ratings of your players, so maybe it's time to think about hiring somebody new. Maybe some really good coach from another team gets fired. You can go ahead and hire that coach. Now, a little bit more on the attributes. Teaching, specifically, because offense, defensive, power play, and penalty kill all kind of make sense. Those all, in that situation in the game, players' ratings will be affected by your coach's rating at that specific situation. But teaching is one that affects rebuilding teams specifically. Teaching style affects what grows on a player. So, for example, an A+ in defense helps increase defender potential. So if you have somebody who's got an A in offense, an A in defense, a well-rounded coach, he's going to help them, all your players grow, including goalies. But if you have an A+ offensive coach and like maybe a B he's got for defense, you're probably going to see your forwards and goal scorers and maybe offensive defensemen excel more in their offensive side than you will see them excel in their defensive side. So coaching will play a big impact. Coach influence also affects other coaches' experience. So that is the other one that, you might not know about. But what that means is, like I said, you've got your offensive, defensive, and AHL coaches, etc. They will have their experience and their growth affected by your head coach's coach influence rating. So obviously, if you're hoping to grow some offensive or defensive coaches, or maybe look to groom a coach for the future, the coach influence is going to be what you want to look for. Now, coaches can accumulate stats and can win the Jack Adams. So EA has added the Jack Adams Award to NHL 20 franchise mode, which is going to be nice. It's going to be fun to see which coaches win the award. Maybe it's somebody who took over a team halfway through the season and all of a sudden they just took off. Look at St. Louis. Or maybe it's just a team that dominated the whole season and won the President's Trophy. I mean, John Cooper and the Tampa Bay Lightning, he probably, that's, if you see a situation like that, or that is your head coach, you're most likely going to see him win the Jack Adams. Now, coaches also have chemistry and morale. Coaches' morale and chemistry affects the staff, which will affect the gameplay. So you have, a bad coaching morale or bad coaching chemistry, you're going to have, worse performance. You're going to see those less boosts or more negatives for your players because your coaching staff can't get it together. Now they display it in bar form. That is morale. They display in bar form. It is no longer with the smiley faces, which you're like, okay, yeah, he's got the green smiley face or the really green smiley face. You can never really tell how you are doing. Now you can. It is in bar form, and it's got 4 different sectors, I would say. Team performance, which obviously goes along with wins and losses. Coaching staff, so this goes back to that coaching staff chemistry I was just talking about. That's how well they get along with the other coaches. Management, that is you and the way you interact with your coach, because there is now a very deep interaction system, which I will get into in a little bit. And then the player relations. So how are the relationships with the players? Do you have star players that hate this coach, or do you have, this coach favors certain types of players, and therefore he doesn't like some of the players you have on the roster? That's going to affect chemistry and morale. It's going to affect the way your team plays. Players also have a coach satisfaction meter right back at them. Star players might demand a coaching change if they don't have high enough coaching satisfaction. You're starting, maybe you're 2-12 in your first 14 games, a horrible start. Your star players might come to you and initiate a conversation saying, hey, GM, I think it's time for us to change our head coach. And with the new interaction system you have, you can now agree, persuade, or disagree. A little bit more on that later. CPU teams, which is huge because I know in FIFA they added dynamic potential, but only for your team, which makes it kind of stale. Only your players are going to have dynamic potential. That's not as fun. But here in NHL 20, CPU teams have expectations and will hire and fire their coach. So say a winning team, let's go with the Tampa Bay Lightning. Say they get off to a 5-10 start. You might see their coach get on the hot seat, and coaches will be hired and fired mid-season. So you might see a really good coach who just had a bad first month get fired because he's on a Stanley Cup contending team. You will also get notified of this change via a pop-up during your simulation in the game as you're progressing. It'll pop up on screen. Now, I'm not sure what that's going to look like, but you'll at least get notified when something of this magnitude happens. Coaches have a big impact on the sim engine, so you want the best coach available, and the CPU wants the best coach available as well. They're not just going to get by with getting the highest overall players and having a really, really shitty head coach. You're not going to win that way, and neither is the CPU. Now, I touched on a little bit earlier, conversations and presentation when it comes to that. It's no longer just the four options where it just affects morale. It's a one-way conversation. They ask you a question and you respond. Now, they might come to you with a demand or a request, and you have multiple options. You can agree, deny, or persuade. Now, persuasion comes with a little bit of a riskiness. So you can see over to the side, there is a persuasion success rate. Risky or not risky, it depends on what you're asking and what you're trying to persuade, and that will also affect their morale. So, for example, the head coach can come to you and say, hey, we need to add an NHL vet. If you agree, they might give you specific guidelines, like, yes, we need to add a winger over 30 years of age, and then you can still agree or deny with that. You might agree that we need a veteran, but you may not agree with the criteria, so you can try and persuade them otherwise. Failing a promise loses morale, and vice versa. Succeeding with the promise will gain morale. Next, you have interviews. Now, this is not post-match and pre-match interviews, which kind of is disappointing, but we're still on the coaching train here, guys. They really reworked the morale system, and coaching is way deeper. When they initially said it, I was but it actually is looking pretty good. You can interview and get more information from your coaches, so you can find the right coach for your team. Extra details on their desires. Maybe they want to play for a large market winning team. They don't want to be on a Buffalo Sabres rebuild. That's not the kind of team they want to coach. They want to coach a Pittsburgh Penguins kind of thing, or some team that is successful and doing in a large market, doing well. This also applies to players, so this will happen before you draft a player. You can get some more information out of them and see what kind of player you want to be bringing into your locker room. Now, each coach has their own kind of criteria, like I was mentioning. This is primarily in lines with you've got your line strategy, so you can see how you want individual lines to play. So maybe your coach wants to use the overload system on line 1, behind the net on line 2, crash the net on line 3, and crash the net on line 4. But you may have to adjust for the players as well. That affects what type of player, and the players all have their own wants and needs when it comes to what line they would like to be on and what line they fit on. It's so in-depth, it's crazy. There's team strategy now, which is what the whole makeup of the team, how is it going to play? Do you want to play offensive, defensive, aggressive, physical, things like that nature? And then finally you have scheme fit, And this is really nice. So it'll just show you on the coach scheme fit how each player fits into that coach's scheme. So there's another bar, really nice to look at. You can see how each player fits into your coach's scheme. So maybe your star player doesn't fit. Do you make a move for a star player that does, or do you fire your coach and find a coach that's going to line up with your star player? Again, Buffalo, for example, you've got a guy like Jack Eichel. Maybe he doesn't fit with whatever coach you have. Do you trade Jack Eichel and maybe try and find some other stars? Or do you just hire and fire coaches at will? Obviously, it's not working for them in real life, but my own personal tangent aside. Players have preferred line strategies too. So this goes back and forth between coaches and players. It's a big dynamic that you're going to have to listen to. A complete lineup fit will add a +5 to their overall. Now, this is rare because unless you specifically target the perfect player for each role, you're probably not going to see a +5. And it's also, you can go down to a -5 if they just really, really don't fit. If you just have a team that has no cohesiveness with your coach, the schemes don't line up at all, you could go down to a -5, but it's going to be somewhere in that range. And this will go for player type, such as two-way forward, playmaker, sniper, power forward, grinder, etc., as well as position. No more can you get away with playing a left winger at center or centers at right wing just because you have all the centers and you just put 4 lines of centers because those are the best players you have. That is going to also hurt your team chemistry. Now, coaches have an ice time variance as well. Guys, this is so in-depth. I'm really looking forward to trying this out. I'm looking forward to EA Access and just playing around with franchise mode. I'll bring you guys videos as soon as I can with NHL 20. But coaches have ice time variance. So maybe they like to roll all 4 lines. Or maybe they really like to favor their top lines. Maybe line 1 gets the majority of the time, or the top 2 lines get the majority of the time. Or like I said, all 4 lines get an even distribution. So that's another factor that's going to change what you see with CPU-controlled teams. This also has to do with the way they make a lineup. So a coach can have 4 different types of lineups he likes to make: balanced, offensive, defensive, and physical. This is going to vary what you play against and see as far as the CPU, because each coach is going to be different. They're going to be hired and fired. There's a lot of replayability in franchise mode now. It's not going to be so much redundancy, and the same players always do well, and you can just plug and play every good player you've got and it's going to work, and you just play the same teams, and you know the same teams become good and those teams become bad after a while. You don't exactly know how it's all going to play out. Also, because the scheme fit is such a big factor, it now has its own part in trades. You can now use your pro scouts to find, first of all, teams, strategies, and their per line strategies, so you can find out what opposing coaches are most likely going to roll against you and what kind of strategy. Maybe they're going to be a defensive team, so you go into that game playing differently, or they're going to be an offensive-minded team, so if you're playing your games in franchise mode, you might want to look out for that. This team might try and hit you, so you'll never be safe unless you can build up a big enough lead. And then also, for your pro scouts, the players now have a lineup fit per your team strategy. So some examples they gave is Ryan Getzlaf, for example. He would fit perfectly into your first line, and he would match all your power play strategies. So you don't have to worry about him not being a scheme fit, whereas maybe somebody else wouldn't fit in to what your team wants to do. They'd probably fit on your second line, but they're a first liner, so maybe you don't want to go after that. Plus, they wouldn't match any of your special teams, so maybe that's not the right guy for you. Then your amateur scout does the same thing. With a scheme fit, you can maybe select the best player available. You're picking between 3 players. They're all looking about the same to you. Pick the one that has the best scheme fit with your team, the one who's going to fit your team and the mold you want to build, as well as what your coach wants. Then the prospects also have an NHL ETA, which I think is a great feature. You can now determine your player readiness when you're drafting them. Obviously, you have to have them scouted, and that's the only way you'll find out. But you can know whether they're NHL ready this year, whether they'll be 1, 2, 3 years out of the NHL. I don't know if there's a never feature for like 7th round picks. They may never. It could be an option, or like long shot. I don't know what exactly every rating is, but that's pretty cool. Along these lines, we now have the trade finder. So we are kind of done with coaching. Coaching and scheme is huge this year, guys. I'm excited to see how it plays out. But a quality of life adjustment they added is trade finder. Now, NBA 2K's had this for a long time, and it's a great feature. But now you can find offers for your players, and you can find out what the computer's going to want you to offer for one of their players. Bad contracts now matter. The example they used in their breakdown video was Louis Eriksson. They had to throw in a first in Louis Eriksson, and they got a third and a random player, I forgot who it was, from Ottawa. Ottawa was willing to take on that contract. They were a bad team. They wanted your first, but you'd have to give up your first to get rid of Eriksson's contract. So now you can have contracts matter. These big contracts, these bad contracts, they matter. You know, sometimes you couldn't even get rid of the player, period, but now it seems like they did a good job of weighting it. Louis Eriksson's contract is movable, but for the right price. It's super quick. Watching them do that in the video was really nice. You just select your players, and the left bumper, or L1, was the button I saw at the bottom of the screen that just took you right to the trade finder. So if you guys don't know how to do it, now you do. You can still edit the trade, but you can accept it or decline it based on what you're seeing there. So it's a good starting point, and you can maybe sweeten it, or maybe you don't want to give up this player but give up a similar player because you're higher on one than the other, or maybe you want to see if you can squeeze a fourth or a fifth out of the deal, see what the computer's willing to do. And now junior contracts have their own bucket and no longer count towards your main 50-man roster. So some people's games actually glitched out and you couldn't advance because you just had too many prospects. I know that happened to my roommate. He acquired too many prospects and he couldn't advance. It would just crash the game every time he tried to advance past free agency. So it's great now that they have their own 40-man bucket for WHL, OHL, QMJHL contracts that aren't going to count towards your main roster. More along the trade value and trading, points per game now have a value, and for goalies it's save percentage in trades and contracts. So for example, they said if Mitch Marner has a 100-point season or like a 110-point season, he's going to ask for big money if that's his contract year. And if he gets maybe 55 points, he may not ask for, that 10 million. He may ask for 8 million, 9 million, maybe even 7.5, but he's going to ask for less because he did worse. So now your player's performance will matter. And that also goes for unproven players. I know we have all had those 85 overalls that have 1 year left on their deal, and then all of a sudden are asking for $9 million and they haven't even played in the NHL at all. They'll probably be asking for a more reasonable contract, maybe a bridge deal of 2 years at $2.5, $3 million. So now unproven players will ask for less money, whereas top talents, proven players who have gotten 100 points will ask for more money. Teams will also try and ship out bad contracts. They use Patrick Marleau, for example, but they will have to sweeten the deal. So you can say, hey, I'll take on Patrick Marleau, but you have to give me your first, and I'll give you, a third-round pick in return for that. And they might just accept it because they want to get rid of that contract so badly, but they will add bad contracts to their trade block, and the same rules applies to the computer as it does to you, which is nice to hear that the computer won't be cheesing us all year. Also, I know they said they fixed this in 19, but they said it again in 20, so we'll see if it actually comes true. But they have smarter goalie management. Like, goalies will be filled out on rosters, and you can no longer find a team that's their best goalie's a 74, some AHL caliber goalie, and they have 2 of them. And that's their entire depth in goalies. So hopefully they did fix that. And goalies will now have less value than skaters. So no more are the days where you can just trade a franchise goalie that you drafted in the 4th round and some extra sweeteners for McDavid. He's going to have less value than a guy like McDavid. Obviously, a second-line center is still more valuable than that medium elite prospect goalie, so they will weight that accordingly. Another thing that I love to hear that's going to be such a great quality of life adjustment for trading is 1-year contracts are still worth less as the season progresses, but you can now trade them at the draft. They'll be very cheap at the draft because you're only trading for the right to try and sign them before free agency hits. RFA, UFA, we've seen it happen before. This I know off the top of my head. The Sabres traded the third round pick for the right to try and sign Jimmy Vesey a few years ago. He declined and then went to New York, but the Sabres still had the first negotiating rights, so you might be able to try something like that if you notice a team doesn't have the cap space, so you can maybe try and trade for a Mitch Marner. Now, it's going to be more than a third-round pick, obviously, but you can trade for Mitch Marner or trade away a guy like Mitch Marner for picks or players just because you don't have the cap space to sign him. Some more minor details. Trade alert pop-ups. So for big trades, any kind of blockbuster, it'll pop up just like the coaching hire and fire will. The sim engine now has a scoring setting, high, medium, and low. There is more 100-point seasons on the medium, the default setting. But if you want to beef that up even more or nerf that, go ahead. You can do high or low, but I think I might keep mine on medium. Scouting was nerfed, so now you're going to get less information per scouting trip, which I don't like because scouting was already tedious, but now it's going to be even harder to scout, so I'm a little bit upset about that. And there's also going to be fewer franchise and elite goalies in the draft. So it looks like if you get a good goalie, stick with him because you're not going to get too many opportunities, although they do have less trade value, so play that as you will. Auto owner mode now, so you can play owner mode, but you can let the game automatically repair or upgrade facilities for you, set prices for you automatically, so you can just play owner mode, listen to the owner expectations, but not have to deal with any of the pricing, which I've seen some complaints on, specifically on Reddit. Legends, finally, can be brought into franchise mode as well as all-time teams. So they said they could bring in the all-time Edmonton Oilers or put Gretzky on the Oilers and watch him play alongside McDavid, which would just be not fair. Draft lottery jumps are displayed, so I know it used to just say the lottery who won, but it never used to say where they jumped from. So now if a team jumps from 10 to 2, it'll be displayed. And finally, medium elites and top 6 players are more randomized as far as hitting their potential. It was pretty confirmed that a medium elite player was going to be good unless you just never gave him ice time. Now it's a little bit more random. Same thing with top 6. They aren't guaranteed to hit it like they used to be. It's still a more likely chance, I assume. We'll have to see how EA change the sliders. But that is all the new additions to franchise mode. I'm pretty excited to get my hands on it. You guys let me know your thoughts and comments. And if you want me to be more specific, let me know. I will explain everything in the comment section if you want me to. But guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you want to see some more. And I will see you guys in the next one.